Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. Today we're joined by Jamie Catto. So Jamie Catto is known for several things. He was in a band called Faithless that were pretty big, and many of us have danced our heads off to them. He released a film which was very interesting around various kind of interviews with various spiritual teachers and traveled the world with that film, and has also been doing workshops on creativity, on inner critic. I've worked with him. I've had him on Purpose Black Belt doing purpose stuff. I've got a quote here from Stephen Fry. Jamie Catto is kind, wise, open, boundless, energetic, optimistic, and passionate. I adore him, from Stephen Fry, no less. You've also got quotes on your website from Daily Telegraph and Noam Chomsky, no less. What else? Your book is one of the recommended reading lists for people that are looking into purpose that I work with. Jamie fucking Catto, welcome.
Yo. And
you're actually in the UK now, right?
Yes, briefly.
And we were not long ago working together on the Brighton seafront, doing some great work. You're one of the sort of top-rated people on some of my courses that you've been a guest trainer on.
Oh,
and people years ago said we would hate each other, but that has happily not proven to be the case. We've ended up becoming friends, so it's nice to see you again.
Lovely, yeah, thank you. Really lovely to be here.
And let's just dive right in. So how did you get interested in the body?
I suffer from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and that has manifested itself throughout my whole childhood, adolescence, 20s, 30s, 40s, in the form of, in the extreme sense, sort of meltdown-y, panic attack-y, just losing all power, and on the subtlest of just a sort of base level of anxiety that I didn't quite often know why I was there, would wake up in it. And in order to survive what on one side is basically a sort of uber oversensitivity to a lot of stimulus or to a lot of certain kinds of triggers, the first practices that gave me any kind of relief or any kind of control, any hope to be anything other than just tossed and smashed on the waves and the rocks of it, was the Taoist inner dissolving practices where, like in Qigong and in Tai Chi, you feel the sensations inside your body. You feel which places feel blocked or strong or numb. And you know very intimately after a while what's pressure in the throat, what's contraction in the heart, what's yucky in the belly, whatever. And what I've learned, I think, through that is that those sensations which are uncomfortable, we often, because we're so comfort addicted in our culture, we get a headache, take a pill, we're totally not into discomfort. So because when the body's flushing out or recalibrating or dealing with energy in the body, it often feels very tender or vulnerable. And so the natural thing is to turn away from it and to think, I've got something I need to get rid of, or to run to one of the addictions or get a session with someone or anything to not feel this discomfort. And when I began to learn to be more curious about discomfort than in rejection of it, and therefore more curious about myself and not in rejection of myself, because every time I run away from my feelings and try and get rid of them or avoid them, I'm kind of saying to myself, Jamie, your feelings are not okay to feel. So there's a kind of self-abandonment that we perpetuate when we're trying to just cherry pick the comfortable moments in life. And it was by learning how to breathe into different places, just be present with the sensations and turn rejection into curiosity, even fascination, that I learned that the body does its most efficient unblocking, its most efficient recalibrating and self-cleaning and mending and whatever else other complex things it's doing. It does the best when I'm willing to just be present with it, not do some clever nostril breathing, not just be with it and try and be friendly, or at least a bit of a yes to it, a curiosity. And that's just an immense, immense turning point for all of us to be able to just put our hands up and say, I am now a human who is willing to feel some of my uncomfortable feelings. It's like counterintuitive to many of us because of how we've been brought up in this culture of comfort addiction. But yeah, that was the real key of the body of when I was melting down, being able to put my hand on my heart or my belly and just breathe, return to my breath, return to the body, return to this moment. when all the congestion of terror and anxiety is happening in my head, to sort of breathe down into the belly, let the body's genius recalibrate it, spread the energy through the body, not just condensed up in the freaked out head, or the glands are going crazy. Yeah, it was a huge, huge turning point for having some sort of a possibility to not just be in a constant state of meltdown.
And Jamie, was this before your kind of musician days when you're primarily a musician, or was it something you learned during that process? I'm thinking today we're going to explore creativity in the body from various angles. What was the timeline for kind of realizing that actually not running away from oneself with drink or drugs or distraction or whatever, but tuning in maybe was the secret here?
I think it was certainly when I met Bruce Francis, who's a great Qigong and Taoist water lineage holder master, of this kind of stuff. But before that, I did my first workshop. I used to have like such chronic panic attacks in my late teens that my first band, when we were about to go on our first tour, everyone was like, well, how are we going to do this? Jamie can't sleep anywhere except his own bed without totally puking all night and freaking out and getting in a terror state. How are we possibly going to go on tour? And I went to this workshop that still exists somewhere. It's called Turning Point. It was run by this wonderful guy who's now dead called Graham Brown, this master facilitator. And the first time I did that workshop, I was like 21. And yeah, it was just the first time where there was even any conversation other than, it feels bad, get rid of it. And that was a big turning point. When I did that workshop, we just started to risk going on tour, and I was totally safe. I could sleep anywhere, and it was fine for a good few years. And because of this complex PTSD, it's funny. Like sometimes you can be fine for ages, and then one tiny trigger, like literally the expression on someone's face, can unconsciously send you into a very strange, eerie. You don't realize when in your bedroom, when you look around your room, you look at your usual picture or your chest of drawers or the clothes on the floor, the normalness of that kind of provides a kind of base safety. And when you're in this kind of a state, you look around and nothing seems like you recognize it. Like you just feel like, well, how did I get here? Who am I anyway? Like you almost feel like the moment when you first came out the womb, like, where am I? What's going on? And to be able to just be curious about the terror. And what this guy taught us to do, this is years ago now, like 25 years ago, what he taught us to do was like find it in the body and ask sort of very strange questions about it. Like, what color would it, if it had a color, what color would it be? If it had a texture, what texture would it be? Is it throbbing? Is it liquid? How big is it? Is it moving? And just by asking these questions round and round, it kind of makes you an observer on it. It tricks you into being the observer, the witness, instead of overwhelmed and taken over by it. That was the timeline of first looking into the body. And I still, even to this day, whenever I would try going to the gym regularly, or I would go to Gabrielle Roth's dancing stuff, and I would find that the moment I started moving my body, I started feeling really uncomfortable, a lot of rage. And I would even like go with my wife to the gym, and I noticed afterwards, I would find some pretext to start a fight with her so that I could be so pissed off by the time we got there that I wasn't coming in. But it was all really a way to avoid what would start loosening up and being felt in my body when I actually went into my body. So I was one of those people that only kind of really did it when in a crisis. Very recently that I've started doing it when not in a crisis, and becoming curious, not just with the discomfort, but with the joy as well, and with, just the feeling of movement. And I've really found that movement, when I wake up in this kind of abandoned, stressed, anxious place, sometimes I wake up and something's wrong even before I've realized I'm me. Before I remembered I'm Jamie and I have a life with these elements in it, I've already woken up in a state. And just moving the body to some gentle music, putting the body into water, making sounds with the body, doing some of the positions that you recommend, where you just open and allow, or you stand like a warrior and remember you're strong, or just doing those things, it halves it immediately. You really want to collapse. You really feel like, oh, I've got no energy for this. Please just let me go into the fetal position. Don't want to leave me alone. But if you can bear to sort of drag yourself even into a small bit of movement and concentrate on the breath and the movement, it does so much to lessen the impact of the hopelessness and the depression.
Thank you, Jamie. And in the kind of creative world, obviously there's a lot of kind of drink and drugs and other kind of numbing things there, what would you say is the relationship between musicians, creative people? You've been around, visual artists a lot, all kinds of sort of artistic type people, way more than I have. What would you say is the relationship with the body there? Because on the one hand, there must be a sort of listening to the intuition of the body, but on the other hand, we see all these behaviors, and perhaps it's a stereotype, but there seems to be some truth in it, of sort of closing down the body. So what's that?
It's interesting. Like drugs, smoking dope, good example. Some people say dope is like the most most yin substance on the planet. And my experience of that, because I'm a big believer in creativity, that it is our yin. I hope all your listeners, when I talk about yin, I mean the part of us that listens, that receives a great idea, that gets inspired, that is impacted by the world, that listens. The yang part of us is the one that jumps into action and does things, and the part that we usually use. We impose ourselves on a problem, solve it, and linearly get to the next level. We don't spend so much time listening and stopping, which is why so many people are out of touch with their inspiration. So when you smoke dope, or take most drugs, apart from sort of speed, I suppose, when you smoke dope, it's like a blast of yin. It forces you in, it kind of blows open your listening receptive bit, which is why people smoke dope to listen to music or go to a great feature film or something, or have sex, because it makes your senses, your appreciation of the feeling and the listening and so much bigger. And you kind of shut down a bit of your body to sort of blow open that bit of yin. But there's a price, because the price is that you tend to need more and more of it. Your body begins to get used to it. And then you can get yourself into a situation where some people believe, I can't write a song unless I'm stoned. And I know many musicians who believe they can't, just from overuse.
Yeah. And isn't there also this sort of, there's the yin of the listening and the receiving, but there's also the yang of getting off the fucking couch and doing something, right? Like I've got a lot of friends that have wasted years just smoking weed on the couch.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about the weed is it can kind of tire you out. But the thing about getting inspiration, maybe just with less weed that doesn't kind of paralyze you, or just without any drugs whatsoever, is that it's the yin that has listened to the great idea, that when you get that great idea and you feel, oh, yeah, it gives you this huge amount of energy. Because really, when you have a great idea and you want to do something creative, my belief is that really what's been harnessed there is your generosity. You want to give something of beautiful juice and inspiration to everyone so we can all share it together and be intimate together. So that can come with a huge amount of energy that powers the yang into action. But if you smoke too many drugs, if you haven't got the balance right, then you've tired the body out too much. You've poured too much petrol on the fire. That, yes, it has gone woof and given you a big flash of inspiration, but then you've used up all your energy and you can't do anything about it, or you don't feel, there's a come down from dope. People really underestimate, there's a big come down from weed and hash. And if you have your big inspiration and you don't jump into action within the first couple of hours, the come down, having used up this afternoon's energy in 1 hour, it's very hard to get going into anything. So you've got to use it sparingly if you're going to use it at all, definitely.
And even without drugs, I definitely see in some of my, I hold that we're all creative, and maybe we'll come on to that, but certainly my more artistic sort of high trait openness friends, we might say in psychology, there's a way in which sometimes they're just burning, and there's this giving and this putting out from the body in a way which is almost like they're on fire with themselves. And it's almost like the muse, and I've had this recently with some book I've been writing on some creative stuff and launching the podcast. And, it's a way in which the muse doesn't care about you in terms of your own well-being. It's 10 o'clock at night last night and I'm doing stuff on the podcast and my wife's like, Mark, come have dinner. What are you doing? And that way in which, we'll talk about helping people find purpose, but the sort of, for people like us who are fairly tuned into it quite a lot of the time, it's fairly dangerous, isn't it? I mean, without the drugs, there's that ability to burn out that's there.
Yeah, I haven't found that. I guess I haven't found that until I burn out. It's a very strange feeling when you're driven by that chi, that very excited, inspired, driven thing. There's a certain feeling of being immortal and bulletproof, and just sort of, you just feel like you've got endless energy, but you really, really must remember to self-care. And like you're saying, it is a burning feeling. You're being powered by your fire. So you have to drink more water. You have to self-care. The body is the first place. And if you accumulate a lack of self-care, a lack of drinking water, a lack of resting when you need to rest, like you're saying, eating when you need to eat, I mean, you can get away with a couple of days of hardly eating, and you can. But if you go to, again, it's like the drug. You go too far, then the crash can take days to come back from. So it's really, really worth. What I love about the ancient Taoists who are sort of all about mapping the qi in the body, is one of the things they have is the 70% rule, where they say, and apart from in an emergency, never use more than 70% effort on any task, and that allows you to be at your best sustainably through the longest period of time. And I've always, I really like that. I'm very much into the gentle path when it comes to evolving, when it comes to working, when it comes to self-care. I mean, maybe it's just that maybe I'm just more sensitive than other people, but I don't think I am. I mean, maybe I just get super oversensitive people coming to my workshops, but having had maybe 5,000 people come through the door so far, I think everybody is suffering from some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, with very, very few exceptions. Some people got brought up by absolutely switched on, beautiful, compassionate, welcoming parents, but fucking hell, that's a minority. I ask the question in my workshops. I say, how many people here grew up in a place where your natural inborn flamboyant entertainer was fully upheld and supported?
Yeah.
And pretty much usually in a room of 40 or 50 people, you'll be lucky to get one hand held up. How many people here were supported in their natural inborn expression of rage? No one ever puts their hand up. They laugh at even being asked the question.
Yeah.
So, that all comes into play, that we've got so much suppression that we're not kind of encouraged to be embodied. We're encouraged to be obedient.
Yeah. I think I would challenge calling that necessarily PTSD, because I think there's a difference between someone who was raped every day as a child and someone who I don't know, wasn't allowed to express anger fully.
Well, that's why it's so interesting, this thing, complex PTSD. There's two kinds. There's the PTSD, like you're saying, if you've got a really major trauma, that was then I got raped, or I was in a bomb blast or whatever. But there's another thing called complex PTSD, and if you grew up in a house where your parents kept giving you a certain kind of look of contempt or disgust every time you did, and it's like it's a PTSD that comes from a gradual chipping away, where you begin to feel less and less safe about waking up into that kind of unupheld place. And I know when you think of post-traumatic stress disorder, we think of Vietnam flashbacks, but there's another kind of post-traumatic stress disorder which is still very, very powerful, and isn't so much about a few or one massive events. It's about a general atmosphere and a certain kind of repetitive Chinese water torture of wounding that still leaves people in a very similar place.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could argue about the definition there and what does and doesn't constitute complex or regular PTSD. I mean, I've studied that in some depth, but I think where we can agree is that people are discouraged from expressing and therefore feeling themselves fully, right? You're not allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to be fully expressive or scream or shout or sing or dance or whatever it is. And it's not in repressive cultures like the UK. I mean, even cultures that I've been to and lived in where maybe it looked like more fun and games, actually you weren't allowed to be sad, for example. As I lived in Brazil, I experienced that. So a part of them gets closed down, and that's also a part of disembodiment, right?
Absolutely. And when you lose that permission, it's not just that it kind of vanishes away. One, it gets tagged with some shame, because usually the way that it got weeded out of us was telling off and stop showing off in front of your friends and shaming. And then the other thing about it is that because you can't amputate parts of yourself, your natural rage, your neediness, your crying, your entertainer, because you can't amputate them, you can only suppress them. It actually takes energy you normalize it, so you don't realize you're using up the energy. But it takes quite a lot of energy to keep that stuff suppressed. And because it's alive still, it generally has to kind of find ways to get its oxygen. And that often results in sabotaging behavior. And suddenly, like they say, beware the anger of the quiet man. That man's anger needs to find expression somewhere, so he can hold it in as long as he likes. But one day, something's going to happen. Someone's going to drive stupidly in front of him, or someone's going to look at his wife the wrong way, or something's going to happen. And he'll find himself in a massive fight that he may not even remember afterwards.
Yeah.
These suppressions not only exhaust us, but they also create these sabotaging episodes that create more shame and more, I must suppress this. So it can be quite a negative cycle as one gets conscious. And it sounds soppy and a bit chamomile, but it really does come down to self-love, to daring to bail and bin your parents and carers and teachers' negative input they gave you, bin it, and turn back to yourself and go, hey, I know we've been living as if it's true that I'm a waste of time. I know we've been living it's true as if I'm a bad, unworthy person. I know we've lived it because of all the things we got told. But actually, I'm going to start from scratch here and say hello to you and treat you with love and respect, and dissolve the beliefs that say that I need to treat myself as if I'm a bad boy all the time, or that I'm not good enough, or that I haven't done enough yoga, or that I'm a failure, or that I'm ugly, or that I'm smelly, or that I'm unpopular, And it was so painful when we were having those experiences. I know I'm rambling a bit, but this one thing I want to say is that it was so painful when we were having those experiences that we almost made a promise to ourselves as little children to do anything but never feel those feelings again, because it felt so horrible. So this incredible brain we've got, this amazing problem-solving genius device, instead of it being set towards wonderful tasks of creation and generosity and unity and all the natural things that we would naturally want to do if we weren't so screwed up, we've programmed our mind to do a very low task. Protect me from ever looking stupid, protect me from ever looking vulnerable, protect me from ever failing, protect me from ever being poor, we've set it on a kind of, as children, the brain on a very low task when it could be doing so much more. And you notice if you meditate or you get people in your groups to just sit and watch what their mind thinks about, 90% of it is self-protecting thoughts. How can I avoid risk?
So this is, I like this framing you have, and I've seen you work very skillfully with people with this, that it's the idea of, look, we're all naturally creative. We want to contribute. We want to do cool stuff. We want to help other people. We want to, there's genius potentials there. However, we spend so much energy closing parts of us down, not feeling, restricting ourselves, and so much of our energy is giving over to, I want to look good, I want everyone to love me, I don't want to look stupid, I want to control the situation. And that's not just a thought, that's an embodiment, right? Usually a kind of tightness or a contraction in certain ways, just to kind of go with the theme here. And then actually either releasing the body or releasing kind of some of, being kind to ourselves. Or you have some wonderful ways of talking about this, which are really compelling, don't you? Like in terms of the mental patient, and you've got some great, slightly provocative, which I enjoy too, ways of talking about this scenario. So when people come to one of your creativity workshops and they're there, or they're trying to find what they want to do with their life, or they're trying to just get out of their own way, we have all these wonderful people come to workshops and they say, Mark or Jamie, how come you can do the podcast? How come you can do the album? I'm getting in my way. And what do you say to them when they come with that?
Well, the first thing is like you say, is getting us to all chuckle and acknowledge together that we're all crazy, and that if anyone could hear our internal, if the people in our life or the people in the listeners' lives who are listening now could hear the internal dialogue that goes on in your head on a daily basis, you would all be arrested. And everyone can laugh in acknowledgement of, it's true, no one knows how crazy I am. And that pretty much is the truth for everybody. And the other thing is, which is connected to that, and this sometimes sadly is actually tragically people, particularly in this country, have a harder time with, is be okay with people seeing you as fallible. Be okay with people seeing you as a bit of a dickhead, because you are a bit of a dickhead. Let's be honest. We all are one way or another. And if we get up every morning proclaiming that we're not, and spending the whole day trying to protect ourselves from everyone realizing what a dickhead we are, that is the block. And when you actually look at the wisest people you come across, from Dalai Lama to the head of the Kung Fu Temple in wherever it is, and the Native American chiefs I've met, and Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, even Harry Belafonte, they're all Ram Dass. They are all much more comfortable at looking silly.
Yeah, there's a fool archetype there, isn't there, which is very close to in terms of wisdom, the only one who survives a Shakespeare play. And we both like to use humor a lot in our workshops. There's a way in which it creates space. It allows
the heart.
Say that again?
Laughing opens the heart, and with the heart open, you're willing to learn because the heart listens.
Yeah, it opens the heart, and it also makes people go, that's not me, that's a pattern. If I'm laughing at it, it can't be me. And it creates that distance, and then kindness can kind of enter in that. So, it's a particular kind of humor I think we both encourage, which isn't a sort of me laughing at anyone humor. And that just seems to go, wow, we're ridiculous. Look how ridiculous we are. And that's connecting as well, right?
The relief that comes off everyone when as a group we all laugh about how ridiculous we are is it drops the group dynamic into such a deep supportive place so quickly. The other thing that does that, as well as laughter, is eye contact. And it's funny, we've been doing eye contact for years on the workshops, and recently there's all kinds of posts on Facebook, fall in love with someone in 12 minutes or whatever all that stuff is. When you do eye contact, which scares the shit out of a lot of my corporate clients, in fact, they feel quite cross with me after I've done a 7-minute eye contact. Some of the heads of L'Oreal or whatever, they're like, they feel manipulated because these are the people that are the most invested in their mask. Yeah. And what I want to do on our weekends is remove as many of the masks and laugh at ourselves as much as possible. So an eye contact exercise is great because you just can't wear a mask and do 7 minutes of eye contact. It's very hard to stay unauthentic without it sticking out a mile.
It doesn't take long, does it? As you say, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be hours and hours.
No.
It's not a hardcore time investment to give that a go. And sometimes people listen to the podcast, we encourage them to kind of do things. And, obviously this is one they can take away and try. You don't need a huge amount of training to try this, like 7 minutes of eye contact. Do you have any kind of guidelines around that? Some say the left eye, the right eye, a particular...
Not so much the left eye, right eye. I mean, one thing I tend to do if I get into a pickle with that, it can sometimes happen. You can't decide what eye to look at. One thing you can do is just look between the eyes and you'll get kind of both of them. But then you start doing visuals. It's something acid flashbacks.
Yeah.
But that can be cool too. It's quite interesting to see yourself in the mirror that way. But the two guidelines I usually use is to try and do two things at once, because for me, I use it as an example, as a way to switch on our full body listening, the thing we were talking about at the beginning. When you are intimate with your inside of your body's feelings all day, which is what I recommend. It's not enough to do it for 20 minutes martial arts practice or an hour. We do it from the moment we wake up till we go to sleep. We're constantly in touch with our insides, and that's called full body listening. So we can have a part of our consciousness that's always in touch with our feeling while still chatting to you and being on the computer or going about our day. We can split our awareness, and we do it when we're driving along in a car. We're kind of part of ourselves is concentrating on the road. But most of us is having a chat and engrossed in a conversation. But as long as a little bit of us is on the road, we're good. Same as looking after small children. You can be cooking or on the phone, whatever, but part of you always knows where that 2-year-old is. So we know very much how to split our consciousness. So in the eye contact, I use it as a way to say, right, see if you can do two things at once. One, be totally, totally present with the person you're there with, giving them more right here-ness than maybe you've ever given another human in your life. You're right here with them during this process, whatever's going on. And at the same time, totally noticing your insides and your stray thoughts and emotions and what's going on inside you. Can you be with the other and be with yourself at the same time? And that I find is a really great way to start the process of being able to split our awareness, to be able to be in the world and fully present and connected with you while still knowing that I'm sitting here feeling a little bit shaky or feeling excited or whatever, so to be able to be with yourself but not lose contact with everybody else.
Yeah, and it's a nice departure from some sort of meditation where it's just internal, because, how does that help in life, right? How does that help amongst the flow of work and parenting or whatever it is? And again, with listeners out there listening to the podcast, this is something they can do through the podcast, is to listen to me and you chat and simultaneously to track their body responses to that. What makes them open, what makes them contract, what inspires them, what doesn't, what annoys them. And to have that slight tracking going on as we're chatting or as they're walking along going about their business, and so, as you say, it's a skill they can practice throughout life, and including listening to a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really wonderful. Another thing like that awareness is, because that thing we were talking about where we've got our brain to protect us from ever feeling vulnerable or ever feeling looking stupid or looking like we don't know what's going on or weak, we programmed it so much. It's amazing that radio station of constant thinking that's protecting us from that, it's on so loud, so much, we really begin to think that's who we are. Most people go through their lives thinking that their stream of thoughts is who they are. I thought this, I thought that, this must happen, that mustn't happen, that's me. But it's amazing to sit there and not do anything clever, but just watch the conveyor belt of thoughts. Because if you close your eyes, your mind will start thinking its stuff all by itself. You won't need to tell it what to think. You sit there. Once you've sat there for 30 seconds or a minute, it will just start throwing up thoughts. And if you watch it do that, like the generation game of this, like one on the conveyor belt, then another one, you realize, one, how fucking crazy it is. But two, you realize that if I can watch that thought, if I can notice myself think something, then who I am isn't that thought and those streams of thought. I'm the one watching. And that is the golden key to the door of freedom, in my opinion, in life, to realize that stream of thinking that you were sure was you, that your whole life for decades has been you, actually isn't you. You're the one watching it. That is the first step of a road of freedom.
Yeah, I remember I did a solitary retreat, and I was aware to some extent of what was going on in my mind until that. But it was because it was so quiet and there wasn't any distractions. For a couple of days, I was like, "Wow, this is what's going on in my mind all the time." The judgment, the silliness, and as you say, it's that other piece which is like, "Wow," in a good way, of like, okay, it's going on somewhere. Someone is aware of this. And obviously all those mental patterns are also bodily patterns, right? It doesn't take long to stress yourself out with thinking, and your body's physiologically responding to that. I always say we're the only animal that can stress ourselves out in our virtual reality system. Yeah,
totally. But we're also the only animal, the only kind of computer that can lift up its keyboard and look at its own circuitry.
Sure. There's blessings as well as a curse there. Blessings as well as a curse. But, it's just physiologically, it is interesting that most of the bad things in my life that I've got stressed about have never actually happened. I've simply imagined them.
Absolutely. Mark Twain has a really great quote about that where he says, I've lived through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually came to pass.
And in creativity too, right? Like I'm launching a podcast and it's like, what will people think? What if they don't like it? I want them to like it. And what if they don't like my voice? And what if they speak too fast, which you often do? And, like there's all this kind of going on and it's like, and then my body's in this physiological state of arousal. And it's like, oh, just shut up and do the work.
Yeah. It's a very interesting quantum leap. Something that my favorite teacher in the world, Ram Dass, talks about, where he says, what if not getting what I want is just as interesting as getting what I want? It's a whole different world when we're not only addicted to our little ego's version of what it thinks it wants. Sometimes not getting what you want leads to a much bigger bounty in the long run. Necessity becomes the mother of invention. All kinds of possibilities and opportunities come cloaked in disaster if you stay with it and sit in the fire. So when he says, what if not getting what I want is interesting, getting what I want, it's a whole different world if you're actually open to not always getting what you thought was the plan. And I remember when early on when we were releasing Don't Leave, which was my first sort of hit record with Faithless, I was nervous about it, and I spoke to him before it was released, and I was saying, God, there's so much people being so nice to me because everyone's sure this is going to be a hit record, and it's been on Radio 1 and all this stuff. And yet I know how quickly the wind changes, and I've noticed how much I really, really want this to be a success. And I was quite worried about it. And he just said, Jamie, either it will be really, really successful, and that will be one set of interesting circumstances and experiences, or it won't. And that will be another set of interesting circumstances. Really feel me out. And it's like, that's true, for everything.
I think I had some early makeouts to that song. Does it begin, packing your bags like people in the movies do, all severe, not saying a word? Jamie, I didn't know we were bonding that way. You're in the room, 14 years old. That's beautiful. I'd forgotten that was one of yours, actually. I used to play that on repeat at some point in my life. I had an instance today where I had an interview. I interviewed a very senior yoga teacher that I was really looking forward to getting on the show, and I knew he'd attract other people. And somehow I didn't press record. And after an hour and a half of speaking to him, I realized we had nothing. And I felt so angry because I'd successfully done about 15 interviews already, right? I thought I was getting the hang of it by now, like some little glitch or something. And I apologized, profusely. I was annoyed with myself, said, look, I've wasted your time. Can I give you some compensation? And he says, oh, okay, well, we'll just have another chat in a few months then, and we'll record that one. So now I get to chat to this really interesting, cool guy twice. And it's like, I felt like a pillock for about 5 minutes, but he was completely nonplussed by it. He was like, it wasn't a big deal. It was an interesting conversation, and I'll happily talk to you again. And next time, press record, And it's amazing. Absolutely. I was really beating myself up about it when I realized and thinking, this guy's going to hate me. I've wasted his time. And it turned out to be fine.
And it's just a trigger. It's an opportunity for you to forgive yourself and embrace being a fallible failure. And your second conversation with him that might never have happened had you not done that might give you a personal revelation. Who knows the path?
Well, we'll probably go way deeper because we had this.
There's an anecdote in my book that I bought the first car I bought where I spent more than $5,000 on it because I drive everywhere and it's okay for me to have a car that doesn't break down. And I was so excited because the kids we were moving over from Spain, and there'd been a million hire cars and roadside hotels. And it was like, finally, we've got the car. Kids, this is your chariot, cushions in the back. You know, where should we go? Road trip to Devon. And as I drove off to Devon and feeling $1 million, and my daddy balls were huge, the moment we started going up the hill on an A road to Devon, it started getting slower and slower. And I just felt that sinking, the same feeling when you realize you hadn't pressed record. Oh, fuck, I bought a turkey. I'm so fucking useless in the world. Why can't I just buy a car that works? I started hating myself and getting angry with the people I'd bought it from 24 hours ago. And then I did this thing where I sort of, like reined it in and said, okay, we're going to trust, even though this looks like a disaster. We're not going to get on the phone and go, I want my money back, which I could have done. And I just took the car back to where I got it from. And it turned out, I was really spacious about it, and it turned out that because they'd only sold it to me 24 hours ago, they had to fix whatever was wrong with it for free. So they started doing that, and then they called me the next day, and they said, listen, we had to lift out the gearbox, and we found a much bigger problem. They ended up having to replace the gearbox, this, that. They literally tripled the value of the car with like 15,000 quid's worth of new parts that they had to put on. So it's like one of those things when you leave the space and just trust that maybe the disaster is about to be turn into a, if I can dare to allow it a bit closer, not reject it at the moment, it's not what my ego wants. There's all kinds of bounty that happens that maybe, I don't want to be too hippie, as you know me, but maybe there is a kind of life's genius that does send us ironic, kind of humorous gifts.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? That, I don't believe in the dolphin god, but it does sometimes seem that way, that there is a weird, slightly dark sense of humor inbuilt into the way things are. I could, you've met a lot of very senior spiritual teachers as well, haven't you? You talked about Ramdas. I mean, you sort of name drop sometimes some of these guys that you've met, and on your film, is it One Giant Leap?
Yeah, One Giant Leap, and What About Me, the second one.
Yeah, you're basically going around interviewing all these guys from all different spiritual traditions from all over the world. What did you see in their embodiment of these people?
Thank you. It's so funny because I'm not going to name names, but so many of them are doing it like they know the patter.
Yeah.
But often between takes, the truth is out, and they're shouting at their PA or... I wish I could name names. I'll wait till this podcast.
Well, there's one piece in the film where a guy kind of gets his mobile phone out and stops the interview with you. And I was distinctly remembered that because the guy's speaking a really good pattern, and then he's just kind of rude to you and gets his phone out and he's on the phone. It's just like such an obvious change. And you left that in, so it's one we could discuss because it's out there in public, right? And I just thought, wow, that was one person I was immediately sort of unimpressed with, and it wasn't because he had a mobile phone. I don't think that makes you any less spiritual. It was the shift from the kind of fake way of speaking to this kind of other way.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary, and also there were a lot of huge names in those films, like household names, that weren't cut in because there was never any softness of vulnerability in their eyes. They knew how to sit in front of a camera. They knew how to answer all my questions and give a really cool, eloquent answer. But there was no soft vulnerability of you felt the real them coming forward in the moment. They were just doing it by rote. Eckhart Tolle, I would say, is a huge exception to that. Even though there are people online like Jeff Brown who are really down on a poor Eckhart Tolle and think that he's a disassociated kind of whatever. I didn't find him to be disassociated. I found him to be very present, actually. Ramdas, again, for me, is like the most present person I've ever met. When you look into Ramdas's eyes, normally when I look into your eyes, I kind of get a sense of your personality, and I get a sense of my own projected personality of myself. It's weird. When you look into Ramdas's eyes, it's like it just kind of goes back and back and back. Maybe you've had this with some of your teachers. It's almost like there's no one there mirroring back for you to get hung up about. It's really, really interesting. And some of the Native American people that we work with in the sweat lodges in the West Coast, they're just like really, really, really embodying it. And you can just really, really feel them. A lot of the movie stars are just so busy and comfortable being themselves in a kind of performance way. Yeah. It wasn't just spiritual people, it was movie stars, authors, people from all around the world, and above all, the greatest musicians of the world. But the musicians weren't interviewed. They were just playing along with our backing tracks and hearing each other and collaborating. Yeah, you notice when you're doing 50% music sessions and 50% interviews that you'd rather be doing music sessions. And this is what people find in the eye contact thing, that we do 7 minutes eye contact and then we do 5 minutes either way talking about what that was like. people find that they were much more comfortable in the eye contact, in the silence, than they were in the talking part afterwards. It seemed really laborious and plonky, and kind of gross in a way.
Yeah, and there is that way, isn't there, when you're with someone that's a really good friend or a really good lover, that you can just be comfortable sitting quietly with them. You know, me and my wife be on the couch and just touching our shoulders, or a little bit of eye contact, or just hanging out together. That there's a way in which that feels deeper, and there's a sign of deepness for many people to be comfortable in that way.
Silence.
What about in terms of the sort of the rock stars and the kind of well-known people that you've been around a lot? What's that performance body? Because there's a certain embodiment, isn't there, when someone's famous and knows it. And, you know, I've met a few, you've met a lot more, and they're famous and they know it, and they're used to being looked at by thousands of people. And it's like there's a degree I'm used to being looked at on the internet, and, you know, I'm regularly speaking in front of a couple of hundred. And I remember the first time I had an audience of 1,000 in Russia, I was like, whoa, this is bigger than I'm used to. And I had a kind of vulnerability hangover from it the next day. And it was tremendously inflating at the time. My embodiment became huge to match the room. I kind of rose to the occasion. And the next day, I'm just like, I'm a piece of shit and I'm exhausted. And, you know, like, how is it to be constantly seen, to be stadium filling, to be, you know, is that something we're really designed for as humans?
Well, there's two ways to do it. You know, like, if there are those people who I would call the true artists, who, when they get up on the stage, that's when I was just posting about this, the one in you that gets nervous about public speaking or performing isn't actually the one who's going to be doing the public and speaking and performing once you're on the stage. Because once you get on and it kind of takes you, it's not really so much your ego doing it, unless you've written down a script and reading it out, just terrified to look stupid, being very controlled. But the thing is that no amount of external validation, it's only inner love, giving yourself and accepting yourself and loving yourself, that ever gives you any long-term peace and feeling good. Elton John, Dave Stewart, they all talk about paradise syndrome, where you've got everything. You've earned all the money, you've got all the people loving you, you've got the stadiums cheering for you every night, but it will never fill that hole of lack of self-worth if you won't fill it yourself. The only person that can fill it is you deciding you're okay. And you going, you know what? No matter what any woman does, she can leave, she can stay. No matter what I'm terrified about, I'm going to love me. I'm not going to abandon me. No matter what my public say, whether I sell less records or more records or whatever, I'm just going to treat myself exactly the same. And unless one's really, really made that decision, one is always going to be looking for the external validation or the screaming stadium.
And people do pick up on that as well, right? Like, sorry to interrupt there, Jamie, but this seems sort of trite or hippie, but it's actually like the basis of good sales. It's the basis of being really fucking attractive. It's the basis of so much of being able to really connect with people, because they go, wow, this person doesn't mind if he doesn't get the thing from me.
Yeah, like when you watch Nirvana, the band Nirvana, you're looking like at a wild... It's the difference between looking at an animal in the wild or an animal that's been trained to do tricks. It's fascinating to look at an animal in the wild. It's very short-lived to enjoy it jumping through a hoop. And it's the same with a band like Nirvana next to an entertainer like Robbie Williams. You can watch Nirvana because you really feel like they don't care whether you're looking or not. They're just doing this anyway. You just happen to be lucky enough to witness it. Whereas when you see someone who's courting your applause to entertain you so that you will mirror back, it always feels a bit yucky. You feel like you're complicit in something which is a bit shallow. And that's why, you know, pop stars and entertainers get seen as shallow, whereas artists like Peter Gabriel or Nirvana or Bill Hicks or whatever, you get the feeling they're fucking authentic and they don't need you to clap for them to know that they're doing what's true for them.
So there's that inner sense. And there's also a way in which performers become archetypal. Like, I was watching some footage of Freddie Mercury a couple of nights ago. Kind of leads, you know, many people know him, obviously, the singer from Queen. And, you know, even though his music might have been quite cheesy or whatever, there was a way in which every stance he took was like an embodiment yoga stance. I was like, oh, there's authority posture, there's warrior stance. It's like every movement and gesture he made was made to fill stadiums. And there was something sort of very archetypal about that embodiment. I was like, wow, that guy had something. And I suspect he had it since he was a kid, actually. If you look at pictures of him when he was quite young, he's still grand, one might say.
Yeah. But I think we've all got that. We've just had it beaten out of us or shamed out of us. Anyone can do it. And I bet you that, you know, it's like, well, I know that the people who come to your groups, the moment you put them in those positions that they haven't maybe in the past dared to do outside of a workshop setting, the moment you put them in, the majority of them feel they're in a Freddie Mercury very, very quickly. They feel grand, they feel powerful. And it's only because it's been stamped out of us. I think everyone has the possibility to channel the bigger thing. And I don't know what the bigger thing is. No artists have been able to define where the inspiration comes in, where you become a channel for something bigger. But when we're in a flow state, no writer or musician in the world would say to you, he thinks he made that up. He just heard it coming in, and you're a glorified secretary. And it's the same, when you're talking and you're in a flow state, giving it to the group, it's just coming through you. You're not planning what you're going to say. It's just you're surrendering to your yin and letting it come through. So I think we've all got that ability. And a huge part of my workshops is about accessing that immediately and allowing, we did the TED Talk game, I think, when you and I were working.
Yeah, you've got some, Jamie, I was about to say, you've got some great exercises. Any of you are willing to share, like the bullshit TED Talk one where you have to talk about a completely ridiculous subject, and people were doing it amazingly, like sort of quite shy people. They were able to step up and give us some of the examples of the kind of things you've heard people do this.
Yeah, I mean, we play a game where we give an impromptu TED Talk where you don't know what you're going to speak about till you open the bit of paper and start talking, but you've got to talk with total confidence as if it's your life work. How to build a fairy castle, or how to cook
taxidermy. I heard one on, and
human taxidermy. Just weird, twisted stuff. But because you've taken away, they're not supposed to know about that subject, so there's nothing kind of at stake. Because there's no way to fail, because everyone knows they just opened the bit of paper and they had to speak with authority about it, right? There's no failure involved. And because of that permission that you can't fail, because of course you're not an expert on whatever's on that bit of paper, it frees people up to be a bit more ridiculous and a bit more open to just give the gift of a gab and bullshit. And it really becomes a lot of people who were quite shy realize that they can be incredibly entertaining and entertain themselves as a passenger.
And they just do it, don't they? It's like the whole embodiment changes. I'm remembering a small Norwegian girl on the course we did, and she just kind of stands up and starts going for it. And it's like, wow, where has she come from? Like, we talk about embodied practice and changing over time, and I'm a big fan of that. But then sometimes there's this like instantaneous shift where all they need is permission.
Yeah, and the permission comes from leading up to that exercise, us all laughing together that we're all numpties. We're all pretending that we're not. We're all trying to look like we've got it together. We all got one mask for our parents and one mask for our work colleagues, and sometimes even a mask for our lover, let alone who we are. We forget even who we are to ourselves. I remember that very much happened with my dad before he died, God rest his soul. He had been that role of successful Peter Catto, you won't mess with me, so much in his life that you end up talking on the phone so much that character becomes you, and you forget which one's you and which one's the guy you invented to get by and cope. Which one am I? The one for the wife, the one for the parents, the one for my kids, the one for the people at work? Who am I? And people have a crisis when it accumulates by the time they're 35, 45, 55. It can't accumulate anymore, and the real one just has to get through, even if it needs to create a crisis to do it. The real one gets so desperate that it has to strip everything away, sometimes with a crisis, sometimes with an illness, sometimes with losing your job, until you're stripped back just to the bare bones of the vulnerable you.
I mean, that's one of the more brutal ways the body can really reassert the soul as a way, can't it? Where people have a breakdown physically. They get very ill, for example. And I've seen that time and time again with people that had to change, but they weren't going to change. And they had it all in place, and then at some point, their whole body just went, "No, fuck this, fuck you," and took them out. Like, that stuff can be vicious.
Oh yeah, and to the degree, it will be. I mean, I don't know if this is an algorithm, but it seems to be the viciousness barometer is in equal proportion to the resistance.
Yeah,
like, it's almost like life doesn't want to have to smash down the door to get to you, but if you force it to, if you ignore the signs, it will make it louder and louder and louder until, if you just refuse, it'll be, "I'm sorry, I've got to do this," and it smashes down the door to get to you. But it's by any means necessary, but it's not a punishment that you've been bad, so therefore you've had a disaster. It's just you've been in denial and turning away and too scared to face something for so long that it needed to turn up the volume that loud to reach you.
Yeah, it's like a little kid that said, "Hey, mum, hey, dad, can I have a glass of water?" And they ask nicely, and then they ask a bit less nicely, and then they start screaming and hitting you, and eventually you fucking get them a glass of water.
Yeah, and the other way around with the parents. You ask the kid nicely, you try and explain, you try a bit more, you're exhausted. Eventually, you go get that fucking, you raise your voice, or you run out of patience.
Just for the record, Jamie didn't used to have 7 children and killed 5.
No, I didn't. I've still got 3. I've got one asleep next to me right now on her 11th
One's
birthday.
asleep next to you. I wondered why you kept looking to that side. You've got a small child asleep next to you, have you? Oh, but for those of you that are on the podcast, just assume cuteness. Okay, assume cuteness.
Yes.
How's parenting been as a wild ride for you in terms of, we're talking about creativity and putting things in the world? How's parenting?
Well, on the one hand, I have to say I am so proud that I must have done something right, because they are fucking amazing, emotionally articulate, intelligent, wise, often also getting into scrapes. I mean, my 13-year-old had a house party while I was in New York. Unbelievable cheek. I'm not saying that they're all good, but they know the line when you cross it. But they're wise, and they're like articulate, and they're real. And so I love that. But at the same time, they often, it's not good when they start using your own teachings against you. It's like, look,
they
go to bed,
weaponize
stop
the
talking. It's 2:00 in the morning. I want everybody quiet now. This is enough. And they're like, Daddy, you tell everybody on your workshops to just be them. Well, just let us be us. We want to talk. They start using the shit against you. That's a bit of an occupational hazard. Thoughts of kids?
Any thoughts of kids? I have, yes. My wife probably wouldn't want me to discuss it publicly. I'm pretty public. She's pretty private. So I might not talk about that one just for her sake, though I'd happily tell you.
Okay, well, next time slap her ovaries on the table and we can have a good rummage.
You're a wrong one. So back to the subject before I get in trouble with the wife. Creativity. So give us some more examples of some of the ways in which you help people unleash their creativity, particularly stuff with the body. Like you have that left-hand writing exercise. That's quite curious from an embodiment point of view.
Yeah, I use the left hand, right hand for asking your inner. There's wisdom available to us. You can go and get your tarot cards read. You can fucking get your bumps felt. Even you can get some Reiki if you want. But no one is going to give you a truer connection of wisdom of what's true for you than the inside of your own body and your own unconscious, if you dare to leave some space and ask it a question. So like when we work with the inner critic, or often when we work with inner characters that have felt a lot of shame, because often when you took some impact of some shame, whatever gift you were trying to bring then when you got shamed, it was always innocent, but whatever gift you were trying to, you usually shut that gift down in your life or blow it out of proportion from that point onwards. So that's a very short way to, I normally take a lot longer to talk about that. But there's a part of us that feels ashamed or feels whatever, and you ask it questions and ask it what it needs by writing questions to it with your normal hand, and then you swap hands to put the pen in your unusual writing hand, and you empty and listen for the answer. Again, full body listening is great for this, because when you start talking to these characters, you notice, oh, my heart feels a bit warm, or my belly feels a bit tight. You start finding the place in the body where that frequency kind of lives and wants to balance itself. And when you start asking questions, it's very unusual what you get back. It's not like the yang usual linear problem solving pros and cons. Who knows what you're going to get back? And people start having relationships with their inner child or with their anger. They ask questions to their anger, and they start realizing that all these characters that live inside them were all set in motion earlier on to protect us. And they've all got amazing things to say, and they all want to be employees. They don't want to be demons fucking up your life, leaping in. They're just working from old data that said, you've got to keep me safe. You've got to make sure I'm not vulnerable. They're working from old data that we gave them when they were 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
So when we start talking to them again, they've been there thinking they're doing their best. It's thinking it's doing its best to protect you. It doesn't realize it's working from old data till you update it. And when you update it and say, hey, what would you like to do now that you're doing that old role of, controlling people or escaping or whatever that we used to do to keep safe. Now that we're not doing that because we're an adult now and we're willing to face our life, what would you like to do to help? And the character goes, oh, well, I could da-da-da-da. And they suddenly realize that their demon's now an employee, all by leaving space in like doing the left-hand, right-hand conversation. There's so much data when you go into that yin. There is not only the great poem that you're going to write, not only the great lovemaking session of your life because you were so listening to your partner that you were just so tuned in, you were the greatest lover in the world, not only the greatest parenting in the world because you're so tuned into your kids, you can really listen to them and be the space around them rather than imposing something on them, be the space around them for them to thrive into the best of whatever they can be. Yeah, so it all comes back to that yin quality of listening will make us the great parent, the great lover, the great poet, the great flow state. And it's only when we're willing to be in a listening state and feel our bodies, I believe, that we can get into a real flow state as creators, whether it be listening to the characters in our minds that want to become employees, or whether it be coming through with the great masterpiece that you want to make, to blow the world away. It's all the great stuff is going to come into the yin, and then the yin directs the yang and says, take action on this. So for me, my yang is always at service of my yin.
So a key thing here is the listening, which, is really classic, isn't it, in terms of creativity, listening to your muse, as it was called. And for me, working with purpose, I've done a lot of purpose coaching with people. I know you have too. There is just this kind of felt sense of rightness when you're doing what you're meant to do. And I'm kind of agnostic about, do we have some sort of life purpose the universe wants us to do, or is it all just random and we choose the existential frame, we just choose something, that's fine. I'm kind of agnostic about that, but there is definitely this sense of I don't know how else to put it, but rightness when we're aligned with some sense of purpose, whatever that is.
Yeah, and also the purpose can sometimes be a very small, it doesn't have to be grand. It might just be, I wonder what this would look like upside down or in red. Or I wonder what it would be like, sometimes it's just a little curiosity, that purpose that can really take you, or it can be my great gift to the world. I'm a big believer in like Bashar, the wonderful alien who channels in LA, bashar.org. I'm a big believer in having no attachment to outcome because, having been in the entertainment business, you can be releasing something with no budget or releasing something with a huge budget. You're still rolling 1,000-sided dice that the likelihood that people are going to pick up on your thing and the day that they were in that mood that they decided to set, the amount of chaos complexities that have to come together to make your little thing successful is so bizarrely random. It's like winning the lottery in a way. Yes, talent is a huge part of it, but there's plenty of super talented people that you'll never hear about, and it's such a mystery that to have an attachment to outcome, it was only worthwhile if it did well. And we've been so trained that it was worthwhile on a number out of 100. How many people came or how many it did out of 100 dictates how well it did. So I really recommend, it's a good thing to finish off with maybe, for us to really change our value system on what value is. For me, if you've got a company that isn't making tons of money, but you've got 26 or 126 employees, 6 or 126 Christmases with presents, that is a value that 26 or 126 families are all living day to day, having a life supported by your company. So it's not about growth. It's not about it doing better than the other people are doing it. It's not about being the greatest unique thing. Value isn't only about the numbers out of 100 or how many did I get. I did a workshop last week in the wild, in the woods of the forests of Dartmoor, and we only had, it was a small group, it was only 12 people. And when I turned up, I had that initial typical Jewish ancestors, oh, I'm not doing well enough, only 12 people have come, feeling. When I have 42, I feel a lot better than when I have 22. But it's such bollocks, because to be truthful, some of my best experiences with groups have been with smaller numbers. You get a much deeper connection with everyone individually, and sometimes it's nothing. The value for me is at the end, did we all rock it? Did we all have a uniquely enriching experience? That's the value, just as much as did I make 1,000 quid or 2,000 quid this time. And so we've really got to watch out for taking on our parents and our ancestors' value system, that success is about how many numbers we did or how much money it made. That really isn't what success is about. Of course, you can't say it's nothing with that, because we all want to eat and drink, marry and go to Ibiza. But to broaden our definition of value, I think is fundamental, to not have so much attachment to outcome, but to give it because it was fun to give it, to do it because it was fun to do it, it was fulfilling to do it, it was in line with my, what's that Japanese thing you keep talking about, ikagi, something like that.
Yeah, it's a silly word people have put on a kind of classic formulation. I think giving it a foreign name makes it sound more exotic to people and more spiritual. But that mixture.
What the world needs, mixed with what you're good at, mixed with what will feed you, or something like that. But you know,
what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. The last two, I think, can almost be combined.
Yeah. So, you know, value isn't just about that. I know you do want to get paid for it. Of course, we all want to get paid for it. But the value is so much broader than that. And you don't know. Like, I've written this book, and I don't think it sold more than 20,000 copies in the first year. Being a musician, if it doesn't sell 1 million, I don't think of it as a great success. But no books sell 1 million apart from The Power of Now. But, you know, I want 1 million sales. So I look at 20,000 or whatever it's sold so far, and I think, oh, that's not very good. But a couple of people, two in particular, that have come up to me in workshops and said, literally, not metaphorically, but literally, your book stopped me from killing myself. It broadens the whole thing. Maybe I just wrote that book for those two people, and if on my deathbed God goes, was that worth it? Of course it fucking was, if it only went to those two people. But, you know, so to change one's idea of value is depth, not numbers, I think, is a really fundamental thing, and not to have too much attachment to the outcome of our gifts and our
and
offerings.
People smell it, don't they? It's different. Like, I've really been doing this podcast kind of from the heart, out of love, because I wanted to. And there's a lot of motivation, a lot of energy for it. So I'm kind of flowing into. I don't mind the fact that it's 10:30 at night and I'm talking. You know, I'm working on a podcast. It doesn't bother me. I'm enjoying myself. You know, and it's also that people sense that. I've had quite a good response to launching the podcast yesterday. And I think part of that is because there's something pure in it when people go, well, Mark's done a lot of projects. And, you know, sometimes I'm not quite in that state where I'm just doing it for the money or for the whatever appreciation, whatever it is. It doesn't quite land in the same way with people. And it's like the artist, the musicians doing their difficult second album where they go, well, I've worked it out. We've worked out the formula. Let's repeat that. And then they do the second album and it's shit because it's not from the heart in the same way as the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's now got an agenda of success, whereas the last one was an agenda of as many people hearing this as possible.
Nice. Okay, so Jamie, it's kind of late. Much as I love being on purpose, it would be nice to have a bath and go to bed. Rest in the yin of a bath is normally what I do at the end of a long day. That's normally my resting self-care and body practice. Any final thoughts on creativity or embodiment or anything at all on that subject before we point people to your resources?
Yeah, don't worry about looking stupid. Don't worry about failing. Fail big. The next one will be good. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about how you're seen. Just really, really jump into just chucking stuff out. Let this bit be shit. Let that bit be good. Don't you think Leonardo da Vinci screwed up a few bits of paper and threw them in the bin? It doesn't matter. You don't have to be perfect. Chuck yourself out there and just dare to be the unique, eccentric person you are. All the bits of yourself that aren't conformist, that aren't in the comfort zone normally are, it's those eccentricities, it's those uniquenesses that make people fall in love with you. The very thing you are hiding to not be a deviant, that's the bit when you're comfortable with it that people get turned on by and trust you. So, you know, just let go of the whole uptightness of how you're perceived and the creativity will flow.
Wonderful. And I know the body can be super helpful for that. Sometimes it is literally just moving the body and it starts, you know, to make that literal first step forward.
Yeah. Bring more foolishness and ridiculousness into your life any way you can.
Plenty of that. All right, Jamie, where can people find out more about you, sir?
JamieCatto.com, JamieCatto.com/workshops.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.